Good morning, everyone. My name is Neil Wiens. I am the CTO, CEO, founder, chief cook, bottle washer, whatever you want to call me, for a company called Replenish Nutrients, just south of Calgary, Alberta. I am a animal nutritionist by trade and dealing in regenerative fertilizer. How that makes sense will come clear to you folks as we start moving around and get through the presentation. But what I end up doing, and the whole reasoning behind what we've done, is over the years I've been dealing with nutrient management in the world of cattle manures, chicken manures, so on and so forth. And we've got into the point where I was just always asking, why are we doing what we're doing in the world of farming? Who in here is actually related to anybody in the farming industry? Got one. So I'm going to explain a little bit, and I won't bore you folks very long, but we'll start with the very first thing that we all know is how many of us have actually had a tomato that physically does not taste like a tomato? Probably almost all of us. How many of us are sitting there and take vitamin supplements and nutrient supplements and so on and so forth? Probably all of us, same scenario. Why do we think that is? Is it just because what we're doing farming-wise is consistent, or what we're doing is how it should work? If we actually go and back into that animal nutrition thought process that I'm talking about, what you end up getting is a full balanced nutrition load into whether it's your tomato or whether it's in your grains, or whether it's into your bread. And therefore, you start not having to require all these different nutrient supplements, or you actually have a tasty tomato for the first time. So therein lies the first problem. Of course, I have to do the forward-looking statement that says, hey, I'm allowed to actually do this today. I'll let you guys read that if you're really bored. But ultimately, what ends up happening is we have a conventional fertilizer problem. So I've been a farm kid from Saskatchewan. I grew up in Saskatchewan. We farmed just under 2,000 acres as I grew up. And all through those years, my dad took over from my grandfather's thing. And for the last 70 years, we've conditionally always utilized the same fertilizer products. So whether that was urea, whether that was 1152, which is a phosphate fertilizer, whether it's potash, which is, of course, a potassium fertilizer, all these fertilizers consistently were the same. In the farming industry, we've had a few minor changes. Unlike the MRI industry, or unlike any other industry, there's been a lot of modernization. So why not in the agricultural industry? Here we've been doing the exact same chemistry for the last 70 years with very, very little change. Therein lies the problem. Ultimately, the globe keeps using the same things. What you end up having is an acid-base reaction, which I'll kind of give you a little more of a chemistry lesson later on. But we have an acid-base reaction that will always create a chemical salt. And so when we put on this fertilizer at 200, 300, 400 pounds per acre on every acre of land that we're trying to produce extra thing, is over half of that fertilizer is actual salt. The last time I checked, we don't grow seaweed anywhere on land. So it becomes a major problem, right? So that is one of the first things. Chemical fertilizers then create this real interesting zone of acidity, which then also kills a lot of the biology in the thing. So if you take a look and go and listen to what I was saying about the being an animal nutritionist, and you'll start to really understand why I keep focusing on this, is when you actually look at a soil top 6 inches, it truly is the world's largest feedlot. There's trillions and trillions and trillions of microbes inside just that little 6-inch window of dirt and soil that we call this growing media. And every time we do something synthetic, we're killing off some of those microbes and therefore take out the imbalance. The other problem is as we hear on a consistent basis, is we have all these blooms, whether it's from into the Gulf of Mexico or if it's in Lake Winnipeg in Canada or off the Amazon River Basin. And the reason being is we've created this conventional fertilizer that is water soluble. Of course, a plant can't eat, it has to drink. So that makes some sense. However, we have this continual thought process that we must add almost everything in the first 2 to 3 weeks of this plant's life. I equate it to being the same as essentially as if, I just had this baby child. And my boy, he's sitting in there, and day one we give it, and we give him the whole year's worth of food that he needs on a plate right beside and say, good luck, son. Hopefully you utilize this all and none of it goes rotten. That's the same scenario that's happening in the conventional fertilizer world. How do we have this as a solution? So regenerative fertilizers are, and we hear a fair bit of it, I think, in the investment world. You folks have heard lots of that. But regenerative fertilizers are a fertilizer that essentially increases that soil microbiome. And instead of actually feeding the plant with a water-soluble product, we're feeding the microbes in the soil so they can do the right nutrient cycling, give you the right place, the right time, nutrient availability for that plant. So that is what we end up doing. How do we end up doing this? Is I use mineral nutrients. So rock phosphate is one of the things. It's just a mined mineral nutrient that is unavailable to the plant as it exists. Elemental sulfur out of the oil and gas industry is a byproduct of everything that's sour gas. Elemental sulfur itself is another very immobile nutrient. So I've got number one, number two immobile nutrients. And I also use potash, which I can't get away from as far as one soluble nutrient, but I do also need the K, and I always need the chloride. I started this company after I got rid of my last one in the nutrient management side. And, my wife essentially just said she had just retired and ultimately just said, hey, Neil, thou shalt not retire yet either. You got to keep getting out of the house, man. So ultimately I had to listen and keep out of the house. So we started this where I had learned a lot of things from my previous things. I love biochemistry. I'm a weirdo. I really am. So I love biochemistry. And through that, we end up finding out a lot of really interesting things that these microbes will do for not only these mineral nutrients that I've supplied them, but in the soil and how they actually do this. So that started in 2018, along with two other partners, Kevin Erickson and Gerard Philpott. And we quickly grew the company into a position where I needed to figure out on how do we actually get into the next round of financing. It got to a point in 2020, got approached by the EarthRenew folks. As you can see, I've been doing this all as Replenish Nutrients, which is a fully owned subsidiary of EarthRenew. But we got to a point where EarthRenew folks were, for lack of a better term, a shell company. We reverse took over and became a public company as we see it today as EarthRenew. Where we are right now is we have got to a point where we're going to continue our granulation facilities across the province and then into the U.S. and in other spots of the globe. Our value proposition as it sits. So when we create a product, of course, you can't just go and say, hey, man, this is way better than that stuff you've been using for the last 7 years. Nobody's going to ever believe it. They don't. They sit there, and in particular, all the infrastructure that's been developed over these last 70 years is going to physically put a little red dot on your head and say, Neil, you're crazy, you're going to get out of this, right? So you have to continue to prove to the farmer that, hey, if I do increase my soil health, if I do understand this whole real soil gut biome, am I actually gaining a farmer a return on investment? So that was the number one value proposition. He has to make money. Number two is his plant yield. Farmer will do almost anything, but if he does this thing and all of a sudden his plant yield went down, even though it probably gave him a better return on investment, if his yield went down versus the conventional way, he will stop using it. It's just the farmer mentality. Environmental sustainability, if it starts making sense, everybody starts to get it. The bonus of regenerative fertilizer, in particular what we're making, it does not leach. It only becomes available when cool little microbes do their thing. Our products. They are regenerative fertilizers. What are they doing? As I mentioned, they are increasing the soil biome. So think of it as we just had probably a month of the flu or a really nasty cold. Our gut biome is deficient in probably a whole whack of other goodies that happens. Our ability to actually fight any other disease is limited, right? So what we're trying to accomplish on this is we are physically inoculating using natural microbial action in our nutrient dense granules and, for lack of a better term, creating a probiotic to the soil. So the soil gets these things. It isn't rejected by everybody else. They all play nice in the sandbox. And in turn, what happens is you get the bad fungi start getting taken over by the good fungi. You get the bad bacteria getting taken over by the good bacteria. It is always a balance. That's how this works. Our lines are just a few of these. I won't bore you with any of them, but ultimately we have 3 different products that we have figured out how to granulate and granulate well. And what they end up doing to the crops is when that plant is day old and baby, they don't release a whole bunch, because during that period of time, especially in Canada, well, really pretty much everywhere, is you don't have a real massive biological footprint that is active at that point in time. Especially in Canada, we're sitting at about 6 degrees Celsius and nothing's working in the soil. So, but nor is the seed. So when it really starts to take off is during that June, July period in this country, where everything is growing, you got moisture, you got everything else that rocks and rolls, and suddenly the biology increases up to, a millionfold. And that's what is releasing nutrients to the plant at the right place, the right time. Everything that the government and also the whole fertilizer industry is trying to push, which is a 4R system of right place, right time, right form, and right application. So the science. I'm going to give you a real quick science background because I love props, and it'll give you an idea. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the problem with synthetic fertilizer is you always have an acid-base reaction. So I'm going to take this end of things where this here piece of rock is physically rock phosphate. So rock phosphate is mined across the globe, mostly in Morocco, mostly in Florida right now. That ends up being, this piece of rock ends up being anywhere from about 24 to 30% phosphate in it. The other piece of that, which is the other 70% plus, is calcium, magnesium, iron, boron, all these other goodies that happen, those micronutrients that we're taking in these little vitamin pills that we take. And what they're doing in the world of chemical fertilizer is they take this piece of rock out of Morocco or Florida, and they then take this piece of elemental sulfur, which is pure sulfur, and burn it. And when they burn elemental sulfur, they create sulfuric acid. Sulfuric acid is used in every mining industry across the globe, and the reason they use sulfuric acid is they wash that same chunk of rock with sulfuric acid to extrapolate just the phosphorus. Meanwhile, 70% of what they just mined out of the ground ended up getting tied up with that sulfuric acid, goes into a great big waste pile in the back of the plant, and is never used again. So all those other nutrients that we go and take in a vitamin pill just physically became a waste pile in the back of Tampa Bay, Florida. In the case of there, I think they just wait for a hurricane and then it washes away and then they're good again. But anyways, it's one of those scenarios where it just doesn't make sense to me. Here we go. Mother Nature did a fantastic job of creating the right combination of herbs and spices in this rock, and then we took most of it away. So what I'm doing then as a company is we're using that same chunk of rock and that same chunk of elemental sulfur, putting it in a micronized form, adding some organics to it, along with some microbes that we know will physically solubilize these different things. And what happens with that micronized piece is instead of creating this acid-base reaction of the sulfur and the phosphoric acid, I'm physically able to utilize everything in that rock. So now I can use the calcium, magnesium, iron. It all goes into the plant instead of me having to go and supplement it later on, right? So that's the main key on what happens, and hopefully, and then what we end up doing is we put it in a form that every farmer in the world can use, which is a granular form, and away they go. So it's in a micron form, lots of biological action, everything rocks and rolls. That's the science behind it. All this is really kind of the flow diagram on how that works. When we get an 1152 on this, so when I talked about the phosphoric acid that comes off of this rock when they're doing this, it's an acid. Of course, I can't go just put that onto my land. It's going to really wreck things. So we add a chunk of ammonia to it, which is my base. And from the only thing that I ask that anybody remembers in your chemistry class is when you do an acid-base reaction, you will always create that salt. So why do we micronize everything? Real quick, again, is the smaller particle size is, of course, if I have a piece that's just like this, what's my surface area? It's only on the outside of this whole chunk of rock, right? Whereas if I micronize it and put it into about a 200 micron, I just increase that surface area from what this would be to well over, in one of these little granules, is well over about 5 kilometers of surface area. So you can imagine the amount of microbes that'll physically be able to attack this at the same time. That is one of the main reasons we do it. The other reason is you see in the diagram, is soil almost looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. So when you have a particle, and everybody will tell you in the world that, hey, all these nutrients won't move if you put them in these mineral forms. And I'm going, well, no, they do if you actually physically make them small enough to get through the soil porosity. And that's how that ends up working. End of this thing is we get the equivalent yield. They look at it, higher ROI. Reason it is a higher ROI is because now all of a sudden the good guys are in the soil. I'm suddenly not spraying fungicides every 10 seconds on the field. I'm suddenly not spraying pesticides. Everything that happens over this last 5 years of research that I've been doing, all the guys that we've been doing, and we're now covering, I'm now covering over 300,000 acres in Western Canada with this product, is the same thing happens as a result, and everybody decreases their inputs as far as fungicide and pesticide use. Our growth profile. This is the thing that really makes sense for anybody in here who wants to invest, is how the heck does that even make any sense to me to make some cash? I'm the same way. I am the largest shareholder of this company by far. Have no desire to not make cash, hence the reason we're going to explain to you folks on what we need to do. Our growth profile. So we target right now this $11.9 billion Canadian fertilizer market. Unlike the organic market, when people go and talk about organics, which is extremely niche, regenerative fertilizer products, if they're in just the straight thing that we're talking about in the Gabe Brown world, where you need to have a cow go to the washroom over here a couple times, then you got to go put a cover crop. Ultimately, we're not that guy. We're able to actually react well with the existing conventional fertilizer method. We hop into that same method, and we actually then also increase the soil health profile over time. So we aren't knocked out of everything. We are conventional fertilizer people, and 95% of everybody that I sell to is a conventional farmer. Our market demand. So 2018 was the start. Over the last 5 years, last year we hit 17.5 million in revenue. We're going to continue on not quite that trajectory trend because we've kind of slowed it down to get into higher margins now as we get everything figured out. But what we're doing is we've created this market demand where I have a repeatable audience of at least 300,000 acres and increasing daily. We're in a sold out position. This last year, we did a program in Alberta where it's called Emissions Reduction Alberta. So I never really thought of it when we were doing this, that this would actually become a thing where it's a carbon capture play or a carbon credit play. But when we applied for this, grant, we had a company that did the independent research end of things to find out, hey, what is the difference when I'm just using all this rock, importing it from local source, and just using the local source elemental sulfur. And if we go and actually put it all together, instead of importing all my fertilizer from Morocco or from Florida, what is that actually difference on a pound for pound basis? This company came out and said for every ton of phosphate that I produce, I actually for every ton, I decrease a half a ton of carbon versus the actual conventional method. And so hence the reason Emissions Reduction in Alberta just granted us a $7 million grant funding 100% equity into the company that is going to get utilized and make a facility up in northern Alberta this coming year. So ultimately, we're just in the final stages of getting the term sheet from our lender, and so this $23 million project, which has been a vision for a few years, is going to end up being a 100% non-dilutive in our world and able to produce well over 25 million in revenue. Pretty cool stuff. Our granulation facilities as they exist right now, so the one that you see in the picture there is our initial pilot facility. We spent the last 2 years on going from pilot stage to actually a pre-commercialization/commercialization stage. It is just getting to a point where we're almost at 18,000 tons of granulation per year. And you can do the quick math. Our typical cell is about $500 a ton on that end of things. Our future growth side of things is obviously the bolt from that ERA grant that I said. That's a 50,000 ton facility, $25 million in revenue. Got extreme pull out of that area. I mean, I've spent my last 3 years creating a major pull in the area of the Peace Country, being Grand Prairie and northern Alberta. Finally, is our future growth is the Bethune, Saskatchewan. So we work well with a company called K+S International. They have a potash mine in Saskatchewan. They have a byproduct of fines that we can utilize in our facility, and have given us the ability to potentially locate right on their mine mouth. That we will not do as a bricks and mortar. The wonderful thing that we've done is over this last year, we're just on the cusp of actually creating a private partnership where all we do is all the IP that we've created just becomes a royalty section on that end of things. So finally, my summary on all this is that we are a leading tech company out there. Like, as far as the biotechnology, I've managed to prove, and we have managed to prove through tons and tons of different efficacy trials across Alberta, across Idaho, across India. I mean, this stuff works everywhere on the globe. The coolest thing that I see on a consistent basis is I have done trials in India, have done trials in California, have done trials in Arizona. And the fact is it's not, it 100% of the time does the exact same thing as it does for my trial in Calgary. So we're not sitting there saying, hey, Neil, you got to go put up a whole different microbe to go over here. No, there's a different microbe over here. No, we've managed to do the same thing, and it's been repeatable. We are shovel ready in the Bolt, which is in northern Alberta. So we physically have the permits. Everything is sitting there. So just because we got the ERA grant, one of the main criteria that they gave us for giving us that grant was the fact that we can actually utilize their $7 million here sooner than later. So that was one of the main reasons they gave that to us. Finally, our team, which I don't have on there, is Matt Greenberg. We took on, he was with WestJet for a few years, or for a bunch of years, and then a midstream oil and gas company, and has been welcomed on our side quite nicely. Myself, obviously, I've explained who I am, and our project-wise are both Kevin and Gerard, which is why I brought them on as great partners to make sure that I don't have to try and figure out how to be an engineer. I love to play with bugs, but I don't like to play with mortar. So all in all, that's what I've got. I can get in deep on the rest of this stuff as far as trial reports. I've put it on the back end of this presentation for anybody who's interested. You can go through there and go, yeah, that stuff does work. Visual is always way better than just me telling you that it works. So I will open up for questions at this point. Yes. Yeah, when we got taken over in 2020, it was our original 3 partners on Replenish end of things. The pre-existing executive team was still from EarthRenew. It just ended up where too many cooks in the kitchen. We just made sure we ended up having downsizing to a point where we're happy with what we have, and everybody's found their swim lane. Yeah, 100%. So we got process patents on our products right now, and so we're doing that. The main thing that I do love about what we do is, where else does everybody see elemental sulfur? On the end of a match. So it loves to start on fire, and if you do play with it wrong, it does have problems. We've 100% figured out how to not do that problem. The great thing about being farming side of it all is, I'll be honest, I mean, we've all blown ourselves up a few times. I've still got my hair, so we're in good shape. But we've figured out how to make sure we don't do it anymore, and away we go. Yes, sir. No, sorry, our growth end of things. So I do wholesale to farmers when we were developing the product, because of course it's brand new in the world. As we've gone we've developed a relationship with a variety of retail, independent retails in across really North America, because of course you can't use the guys who are hooked up with Nutrient or Mosaic, because they have their own products. So there's independent retailers which represent out of that 11.9 billion, about 40% of the market as far as their market access. And so all the granulation that you see in this is 100% through retail. What's the minimum order? What's that? Minimum order of this? 2,500 tons. Oh, so someone order on the retail side, yeah. Yeah. So minimum order for just a local farmer, it'd be 100 ton. But I don't do granulation to a farmer anymore. Well, I don't do granulation for farmers anymore. So like I say, the original, when we started to get the idea of the end of things, we weren't granulating it to the point where it goes through the typical system. And so, not to confuse you, that was more to create the pull, right, on products that were out there. Now that we've created the pull, everything has to go through a retailer, and then the minimum orders are that 2,500 on the retailer. So, yeah, no worries. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes. We're just in the final phrases of a term sheet, so we should actually see that next week. So, and then it'll be fully funded at that point. No, well, the 7 million is the equity piece, and then the other, so it's a $23 million project. And so the rest of it is actually through our existing lender, which is AFSC, Ag Financial Services Corp. Cool. If there's no other questions, yeah, hopefully some of that made some sense. I hate getting too chemistry wise, but we'll go from there. Thank you, folks.